Back in the 90s, I had a few years as a triathlete. Well, my swimming was so poor compared to my cycling and running abilities that I actually enjoyed duathlons more. This morning, I was on my way on a rather special duathlon, involving a fatbike, snowshoes, a tent, and a sleeping bag. The early bird gets the worm, the saying goes. Well, this bird wasn't searching for a worm, but for the wild. My early morning start was important if I was to stand any chance of having enough daylight to get me, my bike, and a bunch of camping gear within striking distance of the wildest place in the commune where I live. What is a wild place to you? Some people might believe that a place is wild if it is inaccessible with steep cliffs and roaring rivers. For others, it might be a mossy old-growth forest, a place not touched by human hands. Some might think that wild places are places that are far from populated areas, and some might believe that a truly wild place have to meet all these criteria at once. With 48,000 kilometers of forestry roads, more than the distance around the equator, the network of forestry roads is so dense that very few forests meet the criteria for wilderness areas in Norway. Most wilderness areas in Norway are barren mountain ranges. Not only that, year after year we keep losing wilderness areas, and the last few years even with increasing speed. In my commune, where I live, there are no areas left that meet the criteria for wilderness areas. Progress has eaten its way far into what was once wild. But there are still some areas left that are more than a kilometer away from human intervention and meet the criteria for intervention-free areas. With the help of digital maps from the authorities, a paper map and a ruler, I was able to pretty accurately identify the wildest place where I live. The wildest place where I live turned out to be hiding behind a mountain range to the south. The first leg of my winter duathlon first took me through the nearby residential areas. Soon, I had passed through the outskirts of town with their hardware stores and the city dump, and the first farms with snow-covered fields appeared. Then the climb to the mountain range began. I threw the chain into the biggest cog and began spinning upwards slowly, away from the fields and into the forest. Half a thermos of coffee later, I reached the end of the road. From here, I had to rely on my snowshoes to get me to the wildest place. The only question was how wild the place actually was. The paradox is that areas can meet the criteria for wilderness areas and intervention-free areas and still be heavily influenced by forestry. Still, research suggested that it is more likely than not that these areas on average have just as high biological value as what you find in nature reserves in general. If you want to find as unspoiled nature as possible in your neighborhood here in Norway, wilderness areas could be your best bet, followed by the so-called intervention-free areas. It was a rather slow walk on snowshoes up the hillside. The forest around me was quite typical of forests here in eastern Norway, mostly spruce or pine in a patchwork of clear-filled areas and plantations with young forest, where the trees were all similar and stood close together. But as I worked my way up the hill and over to the other side of the ridge, I couldn't help noticing a change in the forest. The trees were older with furrowed bark, marked by woodpeckers and insects. The forest became taller and opened up into small clearings. A huge dead spruce led like a bridge over the stream down in the valley floor. Where the planted forest can seem like an apartment complex, where all the rooms are identical, bare and small, the old forest I was walking through felt like a palace, where all the rooms had different sizes, looks and interiors. This forest surely had been logged at one point, but it was so long time ago that it had regained some of its former glory. I felt a good warmth spread through my body. This was what I came for. I love old growth forest. And yet, I still wasn't at the wildest place. On my way up from the valley floor on the other side of the stream, the forest changed yet again. Now, pine trees of all sizes and shapes dominated the landscape. Short and tall, thick and thin, straight and crooked. The fat branches and rough bark indicated that several of them probably were over 200 years old. Normally that's no age for a pine tree, but after extensive logging from the 16th century and up until today, old trees have become a rarity in Norway. I checked the map and had a look at the GPS. I was getting closer. A few steps further and I would be there. Then I saw it, right in front of me, just as the day drew to an end. The tree. A short pine with crooked fat branches, the perfect little monument of the wildest place where I live, and the perfect spot to set camp with a nice view over the forest in the distance. I set camp as the day drew dark and the night approached. As an experiment, I had brought my tiny beer can stove to see how effective it was at melting snow. I had a long evening and night ahead of me, so it didn't matter much if it turned out to take a while. Well, it sure did take a while. Who cares anyway, as long as they're nice and toast in the sleeping bag. I listened for boreal owls for a while, but the forest was quiet as only the winter forest can be. Then it was time to say goodnight, in the wildest place in town.